Well, thank you all for joining me and us today, this late Sunday in January. This is the fourth of four fiction readings we've had throughout fall semester, and now moving into at the University of La Verne's January interterm. It was, I don't know, this reading series has been, and I've said this at each of the previous readings, I mean, by far one of the most, if not the most delightful student-related thing that's happened since I've been teaching in the creative writing program at ULV. It's one of the random boons, or the rare boons from this pandemic, is that we've been able to unite program graduates with current program students across space and time. Well, I guess at least across space. And so that's been fantastic. And I really appreciate everybody who's already taken part in the reading. Tabitha's here, she was one of our readers earlier. And those of you who will take part in future readings, we hope to have a parallel poetry reading series this spring. I'll definitely be in touch about that, hopefully again with current students. And I think actually 3 potential readers here right now. Yes, and some graduates. So more information to come, but that's in the works. And then also, I think I see some students who will be in future fiction series. So, you know, just be ready, practice. Mia, you're on notice. But all right, well, enough about me and how great this series has been. Today we have 2 fantastic writers. I mean, very tremendous writers. Christine Martin, who is a current program student who is graduating. She's a student for 1 more week, and she's graduating next Saturday. You guys can't see the tears, but they're there. And we'll miss you, Christine, but it's great to hear you read today. And then John Abbasi, who graduated, 5 years ago? Is that amazing? Is that true?
Yeah, it's coming up on 5 years.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to have former students and current students. It's wonderful to have Christine and John. And I didn't even say who I was, so I'm just going to remain a mystery the rest of the time. And thank you all again for being here. Yes, as the readings are taking place, I want to encourage everyone to express their admiration and joy in the chat. Once we're done with the 2 readings, the 2 readers, we'll have time for an open Q&A. So you guys will be able to ask questions of the 2 authors. That will begin with the 2 authors asking questions of one another. I kind of like for them to share the limelight a little bit more directly right off the bat. And I think that is all from me. And you guys can take it away.
Okay, so let me introduce John. John Abbasi graduated from La Verne's Creative Writing program in 2016. In 2019, he completed his MFA in fiction at the Rainier Writers Workshop housed in Pacific Lutheran University. At ULV, John won the undergraduate creative writing contest for his story Darling Young Boy, as well as the Dean's Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Research. His story Angel Hair was recently published in Anomaly. And he is a phenomenal writer, especially when it comes to structure and concern and characters.
Thank you. I appreciate that generous introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here again. As Sean said, everybody who I invited, I would name you one by one, but I appreciate you being here. And hi, Mom. The person with my same last name is my mother, who's also a ULV grad. So, you know, it's a legacy thing. So, yeah, hi, John's mom. Okay, so I'm going to read just two short stories, one very short and the other just a little bit longer. The first one, if I can just speak to it really quickly, felt sort of timely to read right now. I wrote it during graduate school, and it's sort of, I mean, you'll see, it's kind of about somebody trying to sort of come up with tangible solutions to some of the world's biggest problems, and so that felt kind of timely for now. So we'll get into it. This one is called Bedlam in the Apothecary. For war, dahlias, seeds cultivated to bloom electric blue, tipped with sea foam to soothe the eye. Bent low over the first blossom, he blew a lungful of DMT into it. It glowed and multiplied, blooms covering the whole workshop. He imagined beds of these, whole fields, and the world would be reminded of beauty. Soldiers would lie in them and dream again. But to make the world beautiful was not enough, and he knew it. You couldn't spit shine hatred. For sexual misdeeds, chasteberry. Pellets to be fit right into the pineal gland. He worried that if taken orally, they wouldn't hit the soul right. The soul, to be sure, was not in the pineal gland. But what was dreaming anyway? Each pellet, slowly rolling in his fingers, reminded him of the innumerable sensations of love, circular and unending. But this was not love he was tending to. It was addiction and slavery and trafficking and desire. But how large a feeling, desire. With the world wanting and taking, he crushed the pellets in his hand. For prejudice, chamomile. A tincture of hot tea and LSD to be taken in front of a mirror. To look at yourself and see something else, someone else, could be mighty powerful. But what would you think if you meant to look upon yourself and saw someone else? Would empathy float, or would loathing take over? He wondered this as he studied his eyes in the mirror. And for a fleeting moment, he saw a world where people held each other blindly without the fear of being together. Sipping the tea, he wondered who he was curing. If he cured the person in the mirror, was it really any cure? Or would we forever be kissing reflections of ourselves? For vanity, evening primrose. An extract of oil with a touch of black currant. To be taken in reverse, meaning to be extracted from the body. He had just as much chance of finding the concoction in the human body as he did of discovering the soul or opening a human brain and seeing another's dream amongst the dying synaptic flashes. If he could find the primrose and the black currant, he could extract it into a syringe. He could bottle it and water the dahlias. And people would lose interest in themselves and focus on one another. But didn't we need to love ourselves first? Or should we give everything we have to others? He made a note to only extract half the evening primrose and a quarter of the black currant whenever the occasion arose. For hunger, hudia, bushman's hat with a pinch of cinnamon. To promote circulation and to warm the homeless. Mix it with something a little stronger to help them feel again, feel everything but hunger. But how to disguise it to make them need it? Put it in a brown paper bag, draw a heart on the corner for safety. He made a note that he would need bags, many of them, and maybe he could float them like hot air balloons into back alleys and tree-lined camps. And maybe they would dream of something other than food for a while. But how many bags would he need? He felt warm and satiated. But would the bags float to their destinations or end up in the pudgy hands of a boy who wants more? Or would the bags just catch fire in the hot sun? For déjà vu, hot water with a dash of salt. A mixture to be poured in all the timekeepers, watches, and clocks. He subscribed to the notion that déjà vu, the scariest of brain anomalies, was caused by time moving too fast, a thesis entirely of his own. With time moving so quickly, the world was bound to run out of material in moments. That's why it repeated itself, giving the common man a false sense of precognition and significance in moments, which could lead to heartbreak if followed too earnestly. Hot water would slow down the second hand just enough. Salt would work its way into the cogs to give the world time to think, give us time to react and realize we are only ever moving forward. As he heated the water, surrounded by his brilliant flowers, he realized that the moment was a ghost of itself, or a reflection. He promptly broke all the mirrors in the lab. Shards rained upon the blue dahlias, which only made their glow more dazzling. For disease, nothing. Honey to prevent infections, poured in a viscous coil, serpentine and understanding that not all infections could be cured by its sweetness. And comfrey ground in his molars to make a paste, and would he lick all the wounds, be the world's shepherd, he spat. And copperhead venom in a thin glass vial, a drop of it with methoxetamine under the tongue, to fight cancer cells and attack tumors, or at least to forget and see something else. But he shook when he dipped the syringe in the venom, thinking of the pit viper's bite. The slithering came amongst the flowers, stems, and shards of glass and around his ankles, and he knew that fear would inhibit it all. And greed. He knew that nothing he concocted would reach far enough, wide enough, so he left it all there. And when he emerged looking out onto the world, he saw the blue fields of dahlias pouring forth from his door to the rest of the earth. And for one rapturous moment, everyone had the same dream, until the flowers were swept away with the wind and the need for more. That's the end of that one. Yeah, thank you. I love the snaps. The snaps that I can't hear. But thanks. And so this next one, I will gonna change the tone up a little bit, hopefully, I don't think it needs an introduction. This one is called Honey Fang. Honey Fang, F-A-N-G, if you can't. I'm a little plugged up, sorry. So here we go. I'm not sure if it was getting advice from my mother or getting hit by a sledgehammer, but I've woken up with a limp. I drag myself one painful hobble at a time to the kitchen. My feet stick to the floorboards. Some sweet scent fills my nostrils. Thick, syrupy strands fall away from my feet with each step. Some rogue molasses. My poor Labrador, my sweet bubby boy, has Honey Fang again. He cowers in the corner. Before I had my sweet bubby boy, when I decided to enter the pooch market, before my limp, and after I thought Dad had gone away, my mother gives me the name and fax number of her breeder. Why a fax number, Mom? She is quiet on the other side of the line. It's just, I don't have a fax machine and calling is so much easier. He says he doesn't have a fax machine, dear. She's muffled, hand partially over the receiver. He says that calling is much easier. She drops her voice to a low grumble, a 30 years of Winston Kings and the occasional cigar grumble. Tell him, dear, that one does not simply call a breeder, she grumbles to herself. One must fax the breeder and provide a detailed sketch and specifications of the desired pooch. I didn't know Mom was there. I didn't know Dad was there, Mom. Tell him I don't know what kind of pooch I want, Mom. There are so many kinds of pooches. Can he recommend a breed, Mom? And ask him if I should quit my job. She complains, as she does on every call lately, about hearing me over a constant buzzing. She asks my questions in her faraway mumble. She grumbles back to herself. Tell him that I can't choose the pooch for him. There are so many nice breeds of pooches. You should mention, dear, that there's no such breed of pooch as a Labrador Retriever. In fact, our pooch breeder only breeds Labradors. If he doesn't get a Labrador, tell him not to bother quitting his job. He'll likely get fired if he gets another type of pooch. Other pooches aren't good boys like Labrador Retrievers. His life will be total and utter chaos, complete disarray. He'll go kaput. She coughs or hacks a low, husky cough or hack and struggles to catch her breath. I'll let him know, dear, her voice is back up 2 octaves, still muffled, that his life may go kaput if he chooses any other pooch than a Labrador Retriever. I don't like the sound of that cough or hack, dear. Maybe I'll call the doctor. I buy a fax machine later that day. I take my sweet pooch, my bubby boy, out to potty. We take it slow, my reverberating leg pain, his unmanageable honey slobber. He looks into my eyes woefully, shamefully, as honey pours from his gums onto my forearms and foyer. He leaves a sticky trail down the steps and out onto the sidewalk. We find his favorite patch of grass to potty on, and my nice good boy, my sweet pooch, is too shy and embarrassed to lift his leg. He squats down. I understand. I scratch him behind his ear. I see the neighborhood kids skulking behind bushes and trash cans. Hungry-eyed mongrels watching my pooch go potty, their hands and pockets filled with toast and muffins, one with an empty jar. They charge all at once toward my pooch. They squeal with delight with fistfuls of bread and pastries, and it is a long potty. My poor bubby boy breathes heavily under the fountain of honey from his gums. He tries to bare his teeth and growl, but he gurgles and whimpers under the sweet gush. And the squealing and laughter erupts even louder as the children approach. I blush for my pooch, my good boy. I pull a rolled newspaper from my back pocket and swat away the neighborhood children as they dunk their pastries in my pooch's honey. I swat at their heads, sending them into the gutter, into the street, and back into the bushes. My leg pain makes it hard to turn and sufficiently swat them all. There's too many of them, and by the time our potty is done, the sticky, stupid, happy children skip away with their hands and bread slathered with my sweet pooch's sweet honey. Before I had my sweet bubby boy, before the honey fang, during the coughing or hacking, I speak to my mother on the phone. Mom, can you hear me? The phone connection is strangely fuzzy. Can you tell Dad that I faxed the breeder? Can you tell him, Mom? Can you tell him that the breeder told me off for the poor quality of my fax? It was a real lecture, Mom, a real lambasting. A long, grainy silence unfolds between us, punctuated by her soft, exasperated sigh. I begin to think my mother is crinkling a newspaper near the receiver to fake a bad connection, to have an out from the call. The breeder said I can't have a 4-foot-tall Labrador Retriever. He said my specifications were totally off. He said that I offended him by detailing such a monstrosity. He's not some haggling Great Dane peddler, Mom. When he saw the sketch of my ideal pooch, he questioned if I'd ever seen a pooch, Mom. Please tell Dad that my pooch sketching skills are poor, Mom. Beyond poor, Mom. They might be scum, according to the breeder. My pooch sketching skills might be scum, Mom, and I need Dad to know. My mother muffles the receiver, still crinkling the paper, and calls behind her. Dear, I'm having difficulty hearing him over that terrible buzzing, but he says he's having a pooch problem. The breeder told him that his specifications were kaput, dear, and his pooch sketch was scummy. She waits. The pause widens. Crinkling paper, my only companion. The buzzing, hers. She finally responds to herself in the deep grumble. Tell him, dear, that maybe he is better off with a cockatiel or a fish. She coughs or hacks between every 2 or 3 words. Tell Dad that's what the breeder said. A cockatiel or a goldfish. Something smart, but not so smart that I should feel brainless about my poor knowledge and scummy sketches of pooches. Also, tell Dad that I'm not discouraged on pooches, Mom. I'm determined to get a pooch. I've even enrolled in an art class, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes to have a pooch. He says he'll do whatever it takes to have a pooch, dear, unless this ridiculous buzzing has me mistaken. He said that he'll even take art classes, even though a cockatiel or a fish might be more his speed, dear, she says in her soft voice over the growing crinkle of paper. She drops her voice again and coughs or hacks. Well, ask him, dear, she chokes out, grumbling to herself. If the breeder gave him any sign of encouragement, any hint of a life raft in this drowning pooch debacle. Tell him no, Mom, no sign of a life raft, not even a half inkling of hope for me getting a pooch, Mom. The only specification I got right on my specification sheet was that I require a sweet pooch, Mom. But the breeder said that all Labrador retrievers are sweet pooches, the sweetest pooches, in fact. So maybe that is a quarter inkling of hope, Mom? Ask Dad if he thinks that's a quarter inkling of hope. The fake static crinkling swells, but I can hear her say in her high-pitched muffle, Dear, he says there is no life raft, not even a half inkling of hope, but he did ask for a sweet pooch on his specification sheet, and we all know that Labradors are the sweetest pooches. Is that maybe a quarter inkling of hope? She does not respond to herself in the grumble. She only coughs or hacks deeply and distantly beyond the incredible crinkling. Is that a cough or a hack, Mom? Please ask Dad if that's a cough or a hack. Our phone connection cuts out. My limp has been pretty constant lately. The neighborhood children, the ones who steal sweet honey from my sweet pooch, all have older cousins. So many older cousins, and they don't take kindly to my swatting of their bullish and well-fed little cousins. My newspaper, though thick and often wet, only does so much to deter the children. There have been few concussions and even fewer twisted ankles when I send them this way and that. The older cousins wait for me at the end of the block or at the end of the park or at the end of my favorite bench. And just when my sweet pooch has found a sweet spot to potty or nap or dig, they jump out and hit me with a sledgehammer. Same spot every time, left leg, upper thigh. I believe they're aiming for my knee, but their aim is ever so poor. My sweet bubby boy is too late to react or too overwhelmed with honey to bark. It's only on my mother's father advice that I go anywhere besides taking my sweet pooch, my bubby boy, out to potty for a short walk. On our phone calls, she relays what I'm doing to Dad and then grumbles his responses. She tells me that he tells me to get some fresh air in the park or some fresh bagels at the coffee shop or a fresh perspective from the family vet who thinks I'm a schnook. When I complain about the cousins and their sledgehammer, she grumbles Dad's advice that I must do what I must do and that they have such poor aim, I shouldn't complain. So I obey, and I think that maybe I'm like their obedient Labrador retriever, their good bubby boy, their sweet pooch. I do not say this. I know that my mother will not like it or will ignore it, claiming she can't hear me, blaming the awful buzzing on the phone. Our calls are so grainy lately. The newspaper crinkled so heavily that I can barely hear their advice. And I can barely tell the difference between her voice and her dad grumble. And it's mostly just crinkling and coughing or hacking. My sweet pooch's Honey Fang has gotten so much worse. The family vet, who thinks I'm a schnook, tells me not to call it Honey Fang. I shouldn't go naming conditions. I limp to his office 3 blocks from my place, taking only one sledgehammer to my left thigh along the way. My sweet pooch struggles under the overflow of honey. Each breath comes like a cough or a hack. Is that a cough or a hack, doctor? He looks at me with contemptuous eyes, like I am the biggest schnook in the world, his stethoscope on my sweet pooch's ribs. It is honey, he responds. The family vet who thinks I'm a schnook takes a box of empty bear-shaped squeeze bottles from his storage closet and begins siphoning the honey from my sweet pooch's sweet gums. We're there for hours and hundreds of bear-shaped squeeze bottles before my bubby boy is free from honey. The family vet who thinks I'm a schnook tells me that never in all his 31 and a half years in practice has he used so many bear-shaped squeeze bottles on one pooch. His cold eyes are fixed with disgust. He finds that my sweet pooch's teeth have been replaced by miniature honeycombs. He scrapes the dead bees from my good bubby boy's gums. My pooch's tail wags for the first time in months. I admit that I tried my hand at beekeeping. I admit that I am an amateur beekeeper, a failed one. I am practicing for admitting this to my mother and asking her to admit it to my father for me. I say that it never occurred to me that the bees in my kitchen might be to blame for my sweet pooch's sweet honey fang. The first time he got honey fang, it went away on its own. Come to think of it, that was the same time my first batch of bees died. The family vet who thinks I'm a schnook tells me to get out. I admit to my mother on the phone that I am a failed amateur beekeeper, that I rescued my sweet bubby boy from the animal rescue, and that I never made things right with the breeder, and that I threw my fax machine out the third-story window and almost hit a few happy, stupid neighborhood children, big cousins and little cousins scattered this way and that, yipping and skipping with delight, as they loved when fax machines and TVs and the occasional toaster oven careened from windows onto their street, like a game of heavy dodgeball. I ask her to admit this to Dad for me, all of it. My mother relays none of this over her shoulder. She doesn't grumble in response to herself. It is a grainy silence on the other end of the line, and there is no coughing or hacking. Thanks. All right. Thank you for the snaps. All right, that was fun. So I suppose, Sean, we can just go right into Christine's section, yes? Awesome. So Christine Martin is a current young undergraduate student in University of Laverne's creative writing program. She is in the home stretch of her time at ULV as she graduates this semester. I thought it was the spring semester, so I didn't realize like you were graduating now. So huge congratulations to Christine on that massive achievement. That's amazing. Christine is an avid reader and dog lover who was born and raised in Brazil. She is a bilingual writer who is working on a novel in Portuguese. In my brief encounter with Christine's work, I can tell you that her stories are full of invention and the uncanny. Her lines are lean and impactful and full of unexpected imagery. She is a writer who manipulates tension in a way that feels urgent. Without giving too much away, I found myself reading about a character shopping for milk, and I felt my hands getting sweaty, and I just felt uncomfortable, but like in the best way. So it's an incredible and unique talent she has for commanding the reader to read on by this irresistible building of tension. So you're all in for a big treat. So it is my great honor to introduce Christine Martin.
Wow, I'm emotional. Thank you for that introduction. And that was a brilliant reading of your work. I love those stories. Okay, I'm gonna start with a story called A Carousel. And it was written, and I wrote this for a class I took last spring for Angela. It was called Writing the Strange, so get ready. Okay. The first time Mike went out with a corpse was a Tuesday afternoon. He was preparing the body for the funeral like he normally did. He had been a little girl, around 8 or 9 years old. He didn't know how she died, but she was abnormally thin when they brought her in. Her bones stuck out like the branches of dead trees. Her eye sockets were sunken and hollow. Her lips were chapped. The parents had selected a light pink dress with some flowers. They had also asked him to braid her hair. After cleaning her up and following their instructions, he stepped back to analyze his work. Her blonde hair was thick and bushy. The dress was too big for her tiny body, and he wondered if it was her mother's. She looked asleep. As he washed his hands, he tried to picture her playing with her dolls and whispering to her friends. He could see her brushing her doll's hair. He could hear her soft voice asking her friend what they should play with next. He could see the joy in her face when her mother tells her they're going to the park. He could hear her laugh as they run to the car. But there was something missing. In the picture Mike created, the little girl's eyes seemed to change color, and Mike couldn't handle that. For the first time in his 20 years working at a funeral home, Mike felt a desperate need to get to know a corpse better, and he had to start with the color of her eyes. He told himself he shouldn't do such a thing, but the urge was far bigger than his self-control. He leaned forward with a lot of caution. His fingers reached her face. His breath was unsteady. "Excuse me," he whispered as he slowly opened her eyes. He drowned in the dark brown that stared back at him. It was like he had brought her back to life. He quickly moved away from her, scared. She looked bored. He told himself he should just finish the job and move on. Start working on old Johnny, the neighborhood drunk whose liver had finally failed. Still, a young girl should never be that bored. It was unfair. Mike had to do something about it. He set her up and fixed her mouth, pulling its corners so it looked like she was smiling. She still looked bored. He took a step back and stared. Her eyes seemed heavy and her smile was clearly fake. He tried to tell a joke, but she didn't laugh. It hurt his feelings. He wondered what her friends used to do to cheer her up. When she was alive, but nothing came to mind. Mike bit his tongue as he tried to think what else he could do to please her. After all, he just wanted to see her happy. He moved around the room, trying to find something that would entertain the girl in any way. Perhaps he could find a doll of some sort. As he looked through a messy drawer filled with documents, her head moved to the left. It was such a subtle move, he thought he had imagined it. But as he got closer, he knew she had moved. He was certain she had been facing the door, and now she was staring at the window. "What are you looking at?" Mike asked as he moved closer. He worked indoors for so long his eyesight kept getting worse and worse. When he could finally see outside, he noticed children playing on a playground. Of course, that would cheer her up. Mike knew he couldn't take the girl to that park because everyone in the neighborhood knew he worked at the funeral home and that he didn't know any children. Still, he tried to think of somewhere outdoors the girl would like to go. He thought of the sound of children laughing, and he remembered the carousel across the street from his old apartment. "Would you like to go to a carousel?" The girl didn't respond. He didn't expect her to, but he knew the answer. Her smile was no longer fake. It was hopeful. The process of taking her there was complicated. He called the family and told them that he had been called downtown due to an emergency, so he would only be able to finish everything on the following day. He thought it was a convincing excuse. "It's okay," the mother whispered, her voice drowning in grief. "Just take care of her." Of course," he said. Then he put some makeup on her face so she would look less pale. He also fixed her dress with safety pins so it didn't look as big. Finally, he went into the back room and found an old wheelchair. He cleaned it up and brought it to the front. Gently, he placed the girl in the chair. "You're going to have so much fun," he said, as he took her outside. She was heavier than she looked, and it took a lot of effort to put her in his van without it being obvious she was a dead body to anyone looking. He had to place her arms around his neck and slowly pull her up with her legs around his waist as if he was picking up a toddler. Then he pushed the wheelchair away with his foot and leaned her body against the van for balance. He took a deep breath before pulling himself up into the van so he could sit her down. He carefully moved her arms and put her on her seatbelt. He fixed her hair and leaned her head against the window so it wouldn't fall forward. Once he had secured her in her seat, he placed the wheelchair in the trunk. He took the front seat and, sweating, he slowly drove north. His hands trembled as he drove by a police station, but Mike told himself that there was nothing wrong in taking a young girl to a carousel, even if she was dead. Once they arrived, Mike parked at a somewhat distant spot. The park was crowded, with children running around and families eating ice cream. The carousel was right on the center of the park, with a long line going around it. There was music playing, and he noticed the little girl smiling. He didn't want to call too much attention as he unloaded her from the car. He opened the van's side door and used it as a shield to prevent people from looking inside. "Here we go," he whispered to her. He left the wheelchair right next to him. Then he embraced her body and lifted her up, slowly bringing her outside. He placed her on the wheelchair and fixed her hair one more time. He ran his fingers through her cheek, pulling the corners of her mouth to fix her smile. "Let's go, sweetie," he said. He thought he saw her nod and smiled. He locked the car and took her through the parking lot towards the long line. He hadn't expected the place to be so crowded, but he couldn't turn around without disappointing her. Once they reached the line, young children and parents looked at them and smiled with kindness. He smiled back, his neck covered in sweat. Someone that worked at the carousel walked over to him, and Michael's whole body began to shake. He was a young boy wearing jeans and a red shirt with a hat that matched it. Mike tried to think of something to say, but the boy ignored them as he walked towards the coffee shop on the other side of the park. Mike took a deep breath and attempted a smile as the line moved. "We can get some ice cream later," Mike said. The girl didn't respond. "I love strawberry ice cream, but I think chocolate could be nice too," he said. At this, the girl nodded. He was pleased. "Great," he said. The people around him smiled with sympathy as he ran his hands through the girl's hair. The line moved again. Mike noticed a police car parking right next to his van and immediately thought he was in trouble. The police officers took one look at the van and began to walk towards the carousel. For a second, he wondered if he would go to prison for bringing this girl here. The thought was so terrifying he gasped and buried his fingernails on the girl's shoulders. Who would take care of the dead if he was arrested? No one would care about the funeral home the way he did. He tried to tell himself that no one would go to jail for taking a young girl to the carousel to calm himself. Regardless of what anyone could possibly say, he was just trying to make her happy. She couldn't be buried with such a bored look on her face. "Sir," someone called him. It was a young woman that worked the carousel. He noticed who was next in line and quickly moved forward. Mike took a deep breath again as he embraced the girl's body to pick her up. With her arms around him, Mike carried the girl to one of the horses. He gently placed her there, happy that he was getting better at handling her body. He held her hand so she wouldn't fall as the carousel began to move. The ride was colorful and filled with life. He tried not to think of the cops outside. After a couple of turns, he found himself laughing at the joy on her face. She looked ecstatic, with her brown eyes glowing. He thought he saw her lips move, and he realized she was chanting. It was the most beautiful melody he had ever heard. When the ride stopped, Mike carried her back to the wheelchair and set her down. His back was covered in sweat, but he was happy. "How did you like that, sweetie?" Mike asked, smiling. She leaned her head back, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked happy. "I'm glad you liked it," he said. He began to walk towards the ice cream shop when he noticed the police car was already gone. Relief took over his body, and he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. There was a short line, but the people around him were polite and let him go first. "You eat this in the car, all right?" Mike said as he ordered a chocolate ice cream for the girl. She nodded. The people around looked satisfied. Once he got the ice cream, Mike casually walked back to the van. He opened the side door and placed the ice cream on the cup holder in the front. He picked her up again and set her by the window. He put the wheelchair on the back and joined the girl, sitting right next to her. They shared the ice cream. She didn't eat, of course. Still, Mike placed the spoon in her mouth a couple of times so she could taste the chocolate. It was delicious. When they were done, Mike turned around to throw the cup away, but the girl's hands fell on his and he stopped. He looked back at her and she had the most grateful smile on her face. He leaned in and kissed her forehead before moving to the driver's seat. "Let's go home, sweetie," he said. Mike felt quite proud that his journey had been successful. He started the car and drove away. The girl looked outside for most of the ride, smiling when he turned on the radio. "You like music, don't you?" Mike said. When they arrived, he took her inside and cleaned her up again. She looked happy but tired. He smiled at her and ran his fingers through her hair. He kissed her cheek goodnight before he left. The girl was buried on the following day, like promised. He attended the gathering and offered his condolences to the family. After everyone had left, he gently placed the ice cream cup by her headstone. He missed her already. For a couple of months, Mike thought it was a matter of time for someone to call him out on his little trip to the carousel. But as time passed, he realized he wouldn't be caught. In fact, he came to think of it as something good he had done. He was proud that the girl's final moments were enjoying the carousel with him, and he longed to do it again. So that's the first one. Okay, and now the second one is a bigger story, so I'm just going to read a part of it, okay? And it's called Late, Late, Late. And it's a story I wrote last semester, and it's about a girl who has anxiety, and every time her anxiety kicks in, she catches on fire. So that's the story. So let's start. I arrived 3 minutes before noon. I'm 2 minutes late. If I hurry, I might not be late at all. I sit with my back against the wall. The professor walks in right after I open my notebook. He looks bored. He pulls out a piece of paper. "Let's start with the group presentations," he says. My head burns. I take a deep breath. A boy from my group looks at me with curious eyes and I choke on ashes. The professor calls us to the front. I practice my part by singing it under my breath. I'm still late. I try not to stumble, but my foot gets stuck to the chair and I trip. Mother doesn't like when I stumble. Mother would be disappointed. There are 16 pairs of eyes looking at me. I smell the smoke coming from my hair. The first person to talk has the loveliest voice I've ever heard. It sounds like honey dripping on my warm skin. I watch the people in front of me. Someone else starts talking and the professor smiles. He knows the student. I smell burning flesh. I watch as multiple chunks of my hair begin to fall off from the heat. The boy next to me is sweating. I'm standing too close to him. No one notices my burning scalp. Maybe they don't care, mother's voice whispers. I can't do this, I say. I take a deep breath. I try to focus on what my group is talking about. I run my hands through the bald spots on the back of my head. It burns my fingers. The boy starts talking. His voice is soft and gentle. I'm on fire. Late, late, late. In the corner of a room, I watch a girl drawing on her arm with a pencil. You're next, mother's voice says. The girl buries the pencil on her skin. The lead dives into her veins, searching for her pulse. She keeps drawing. Her heartbeat gives life to a stick monster and blood stains her shirt. She keeps drawing. The professor doesn't notice. Maybe he doesn't care, mother's voice whispers. The flames grow so bright I'm blinded. My tongue is suddenly heavy. I try to move it, but it only crushes my teeth. There's smoke everywhere. The professor is coughing. When it's my turn to speak, ashes fall out of my mouth. I arrive 3 minutes before noon. I'm 2 minutes late. If I hurry, I might not be late at all. I'm not alone in the waiting room. There's a husband with 3 mistresses sitting on his lap. There's a young priest playing with a younger boy's sword. There's a young woman staring at the mirror, patiently waiting for her hair to grow gray. I sit by the window. The dentist was late. The receptionist said he was on his way. I hear snores coming from his office. I think about the assignment due tonight. I'm still late. Late, late, late. The husband with the 3 mistresses sitting on his lap checks his watch. He runs his hands through one of their legs and they all smile. Their teeth are perfect. They don't need a dentist, mother's voice hisses in my mind. My palms are sweaty. Outside, the sun begins to set. The young priest holds the younger boy's sword in his hands. He moves it side to side, smiling. The boy cries. Their teeth are perfect. They don't need a dentist, mother's voice hisses in my mind. I bury my nails in my thighs and lava escapes my skin, leaking through my pores. It covers my legs and fills me with warmth. My lips begin to melt. You do need a dentist, mother's voice says. I'm still late. The young woman staring at the mirror notices a wrinkle next to her left eye. She moves forward and the wrinkles multiply. She gasps and screams, her nose touching the mirror as her face falls off. She falls on her knees, her fingers desperately trying to stick the pile of dust to her bare bones. Her teeth are perfect. They don't need a dentist, mother's voice hisses in my mind. Do I need a dentist? I ask. My tongue is made of fire. Outside, I can see the full moon. I run my tongue through my teeth and they taste like charcoal. I cough. My lips are melting. You do need a dentist, mother's voice says. Late, late, late. I grab my phone from my purse and begin to type an apologetic email to my professor. I'm running out of time. I can't finish the assignment. Why are you always making excuses? Mother's voice asks. I stare at my phone. The screen is cracked and my stomach is burning. Should I word it differently? I ask. The blood in my veins begin to boil. Outside, the sun is rising. The receptionist says the dentist will be here soon. The husband with 3 mistresses sitting on his lap finds another mistress hiding behind his tie. The young priest playing with the younger boy's toys pulls out a sword of his own from his back pocket. The young girl staring at the mirror is covered in dust as she continues to stare at her growing gray hair. I sit by the window. I hear snores coming from his office. Late, late, late. You should knock on the door, mother's voice says. I should leave, I reply. Mother is disappointed. We both know I won't do either. I arrive 3 minutes before noon. I'm 2 minutes late. If I hurry, I might not be late at all. The mall is crowded. There are children running around parents that look like corpses with sunken eyes and raw meat stuck in between their teeth. Their skin is rotten and I see roaches on their hair. I try not to stare or stumble. Mother wouldn't want me to stumble. Mother would be disappointed. I keep my head down as I walk into a store. It's Mother's birthday and I should get her something nice. You should leave. You can't afford something nice. Mother's voice whispers. One of the corpse parents walks into the store. She has 12 sons and they don't have names. She stares at a soft pink dress as the starving boys tear her clothes apart to feed. They bite her flesh and lick her bones until there's nothing left. She doesn't flinch. I'm still late. I stop at the jewelry. There are earrings and necklaces spread out. I run my fingers through them and a blaze travels down my spine. I can feel eyes staring at me, starving boys craving my bones. I search for something grand, something that would never disappoint Mother. A young man appears in front of me and smiles. I think he's cute and my cheeks immediately begin to melt. Can I help you with anything? He says. I try to take deep breaths, but ashes fill my lungs. He doesn't seem to notice. Maybe he doesn't care, Mother's voice hisses in my mind. My head feels crowded. The 12 sons stand behind me, their starving mouths smiling. The corpse mother is trying on the soft pink dress and her rotten skin stains it. The man is talking again. He shows me dozens, hundreds, thousands of options and his voice blinds me. I can feel the fire running through my veins, igniting my blood. My heart beats faster than normal. I try to say something, but my mouth is filled with magma. The 12 sons' bellies roar behind me, their starving stomachs calling for my burning flesh. The corpse mother stares at a bright yellow dress. Late, late, late. The man is talking again. He points to dozens, hundreds, thousands of price tags, and the tears make me dizzy. The back of my neck is melting. My heart beats faster than fast. You should leave. You can't afford something nice, Mother's voice says. I want to run away, but I'm afraid I might stumble. Mother wouldn't want me to stumble. Mother would be disappointed. I notice a discreet pair of earrings. There's something no one would ever see but me, something that would definitely disappoint Mother. The man reaches for them at the same time I pick it up. Our hands touch and my entire skin ignites. He pulls his hand back with large blisters on his fingertips. I'm on fire. My heartbeat is so fast it might punch a hole through my ribcage. I'm still late. I desperately want to say something, apologize, but I'm drowning in ashes. My face melts and drips onto my chest, burning holes on my shirt. The man doesn't notice. He stares at his fingers instead. Maybe he doesn't care, Mother's voice hisses in my mind. Late, late, late. Mother will be disappointed. I told you, Mother's voice says. She did. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Totally tempted just to sit here quietly and see what happens, but no, that was fantastic, John and Christine. Obviously not disappointing, and you guys are great writers, and it's awesome to hear you read. And thank you for reading to everybody today. Yes, it's just fantastic. So thank you. I'm delighted. This whole reading series is really about me, everybody, so I can take joy in the work of the students. We're gonna have a Q&A, as I said earlier, and ideally John and Christine can start it off by asking one another a question, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. So if either of you wants to start, that would be great. Thanks.
Any preference, Christine? You want to go first, or I can go first?
I can start because you started the last time. So when I was reading the story, I was constantly thinking about wondering what your writing process was like from the first moment that you first think of a story to actually writing it down and finishing a first draft. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little about that.
Yeah, sure. Points of inspiration for sure have a lot of bearing on, I suppose, how I approach story writing, right? So I think it was 2017, and I was thinking for the first story, the Bedlam and the Apothecary. It was 2017, and I was thinking about how, oh man, there's a lot of issues in the world, and little did I know, right, that it would just get so much worse. But it was 2017, and I was thinking, okay, so what are things that are sort of pressing on my mind? And so I made a list of those things, and I thought, it'd be interesting to write a story about, I guess, somebody who's trying to come up, like I said, with those tangible sort of remedies for those things. When it comes to actually taking it from the beginning to the end, after making that list, I decided, I wanted to be very block structured, going from thing to thing, from issue to issue. And then from there, I did some research about, there are threads of connectivity between, I suppose, the remedies that I came up with and what's the word? I guess sort of myths or stories about those things that have, cinnamon and other things combined together that sort of, I suppose, could be, I guess in a weird way, remedies for those things. But anyways, sorry, I'm sort of going on a tangent. I was just thinking about, I wanted to make a list, and I wanted to make this person kind of sort of failing to come up with remedies for these things, so they're too big of an idea. For me, though, outlining the structure and knowing that I wanted each little section to be about one separate thing just kind of made it easy for me. And I think, like I said, I think there are a lot of things I need to add to that list now. For the Honey Fang story, point of inspiration, I think, is just I don't know, my wife's family has a Labrador, and he's quite shy, and I think that structure is something that you kind of pointed out, Christine, is big for me, going from section to section for phone call and then what's actually happening for him. Phone call, then what's actually happening for him. I tend to do that a lot in my stories, and it just makes it easier for me to be able to write from start to finish. So sorry, I rambled on, but there are very, very, very different processes for the two. I hope that helps. Okay, great. If I can ask you a question, I think that, first of all, congratulations on both of those stories. They're fantastic. I was really needing to know about your process with the late story, especially. You guys didn't, I don't know, everybody doesn't really have, the privilege of seeing this on paper, but that story has a lot of white space around the lines. And it's a really interesting structure. And I noticed that the sections were numbered as well, which is really interesting to me as well, which made it even more urgent for me to continue reading, because I was like, oh God, there's more. Oh God, there's more, because it just kept getting like worse and worse for this person who's dealing obviously with the interiority. So can you speak to kind of what prompted the idea for that story, connecting, the anxiety and then the physical, burning, and then B, I guess maybe who were you reading at the time? Because I need to read these people that sort of inspired this. That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Should I share screen now? Okay, let me open it up. Okay, so to answer your question, I was reading a book called, what's the name of the book? It's, are you typing? Wild Milk, yes, by Aura Mark. Is that Sabrina Aura Mark? Is that her? Yes. Okay, so that's the book I was reading, and I love that book. I read it for fiction last semester, and it was a phenomenal collection of short stories, and it was all very strange, and it had very unique imagery, which kind of inspired me to play with structure. And something that Aura Mark did was she would write stories that were very strange and a little hard to follow, and to compensate she created a structure that made it easy for you to follow through rhythm and repetition, which is kind of like what I did in Late. And I'm just going to share screen so you guys can see it. Where do I share? Okay. Let me know if you can see this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, let me go back to the beginning. So this is what it looks like. It just keeps repeating itself, and it's just kind of I don't know. I kind of wanted it to sound a little poetic. And what I tried to do with the structure was just basically keep the reader aware of where we were going without it being too confusing, the dead corpses and the girl is on fire and what's happening. And that's what I kind of wanted to do. But the idea of a girl catching on fire every time she gets her anxiety kicks in just came naturally. I think I had we were talking about it, creative writing prompts in fiction, and we had to come up with ideas. And I was just what if this girl who has anxiety is just on fire in public and no one notices? And that's what I kind of went with. And I got really inspired by that idea. I was like, wow, this is a great idea. And then I started typing, and I wrote this entire story in 2 hours, and I was like, yes. And then I just worked on revision ever since. So that's basically how I went about it. Just, I don't know if that answers the question.
It absolutely does. Oh, weird synchronicity. I don't even think that Sean knew. I was reading Wild Milk while I wrote the Honey Fang story. So that is very strange coincidence. Yeah, right, Sean. I see your face. That was what I was reading while I wrote that. So very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, and then I have one more question for you, which is basically what's the process of revision for you? How do you approach revising your own work? Just because I feel I just went through senior project and revision has been in the back of my mind.
Yeah. For me, time and space, which you may not have right now. But I find that, after I write something, if I step away from it a little while and work on something else, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound too cliche, but when I go back to it, I'll be particularly repulsed with certain lines that I wrote. And it's because, at the time when I was writing them, they may have sounded so good, but they're not achieving what I wanted them to achieve. Because, as I'm writing, I think that's something I didn't include in my sort of process when you were asking earlier is, everything is serving some element of fiction, right? I think that just is the base of how Sean taught us. I mean, you're going through it right now, or you're finishing going through it right now. So there are moments where I'm like, oh wow, I just put that in there and it's a little bit frivolous. So just kind of cutting, not being afraid to cut is huge. And then trusting good readers trusting good readers, yeah, is huge for me as well. Yeah, so grad school was really, really, really helpful with that, as well as, you know, obviously the ULV Creative Writing program. But yeah, trusting good readers and getting feedback and being open to that feedback is not like arguing with them. It's or arguing when it's appropriate, I think. It's good. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for the question. That's great. I don't know if Sean wants to open it up.
Oh, I'll talk. Yeah, no, that's great. Those are fantastic questions and great responses, and hopefully that's, I don't know, shedding light on interesting ways to approach writing and think about revising for everybody. Yeah, I want to open this up to everybody else. If anyone has questions for John or Christine, you can post them in the chat, or you can just go ahead and ask out loud. So please, we definitely have a few minutes, and it'd be great to hear some questions.
I was wondering to Christine, since she's writing short stories and novels and stuff in 2 different languages, whether you take a different approach or is the same approach, are different. Do you take different subject matter or the same subject matter? And just that curiosity.
I think that's a great question. I think that I tend to be more literary when writing in English for some reason. I think that when I write in Portuguese, it's more like commercial fiction in a way. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like it's more, you know, those young adults like novels that you read. Like, I feel like my Portuguese style is more focused on that because that's what I was writing when I was younger, and that's the creative writing background that I had. And then now, like after college in Laverne and so on, like I feel like I am more towards literary writing styles in a way, and that's like in English, you know? So I feel like that's the main difference I notice. But in terms of approaching it, it's just the same way, like whatever hits me first, whether it's in Portuguese or in English, it's normally at night, and then I start typing and writing. So
I have a question for John. In your first story, like I noticed like a lot of like scientific like diction and like just very like intense words. And I was wondering like, how did you come up with those words? Like, did you have a Google Doc or not a Google, like Google open and you're like researching these words, or like I don't know where these words come from?
Yes, it appears that I know these words, but no, I did a lot of I don't want to say deep research, but when I was thinking of, I had this sort of process of thinking about the issue at hand, right? For war or for each thing. And then when I was thinking about the effects of different sort of home remedies, as well as different drugs that were sort of mentioned, I did a little bit of digging about what kind of effects those would have on people, even though I didn't really get into that, and sort of try to connect the ideas back to how that would help somebody, or how somebody would think that would help if they gave it to you know, people on a mass scale. But no, I certainly don't know. I don't have those words just kind of in the locker. That's not the case. So I definitely did my digging, and to answer your question too, I didn't really have a running Google Doc or anything like that, but I section by section, as I was crafting them, I was trying to find the right words. And actually, you know, my wife, who's very very patient with me, I was like, should I read this story? And she actually quite likes this story, but out loud it was a little bit awkward to get the rhythm and I guess sort of flow of how those words come out. So I was actually even questioning reading that for that reason. So it's interesting that you bring that up. But yeah, that was kind of the process. Hope that answers the question.
I just wanted to ask Christine, what was your inspiration for the Corpse Girl story for the carousel? What was like the inspiration behind that?
Really bad memory. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure I remember it. I remember writing this story for Angela's class and writing The Strange. And I remember that we were talking about just ghosts and like how different cultures have different views on death and so on. And we just wanted to write a story that was strange and uncanny, and that would like make you feel something a little like, you know, not quite, I don't know. It was like, I think my intent at first was for you not to feel completely comfortable with the main character. And when I first wrote the story, it was, I think, 3 pages long. And then like revision started and it went to 7 pages. So like I added a lot to it. So when I first started, it was, you know, I feel like it was just this idea of making you unsure whether or not to trust the main character. And it was kind of inspired by the idea of death and ghosts and corpses and things like that because of the things we were reading for that class. But yeah.
So the first story, the narrator doesn't like what we think of, like what do we usually get cures for, which is like the actual disease, right? But the narrator just they just like, okay, well, really, we're not addressing that right now. That's not important, right? And I thought that was a really interesting choice you made, whereas that would be like the most obvious place that most of us would go, right? Or that most writers would go, and we would think, all right, well, let's also definitely address that, right? But there are all these other ailments that are actually, so will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I can kind of very simply answer that, I think. So when I was thinking about this story, there's a little bit of a trick in the title, right? Because when we think the story is called Bedlam and the Apothecary, and we think of going to the apothecary, if you ever think of that word, as going to like the pharmacy. But in reality, like an apothecary, it traditionally is a person, right? Like you go to the apothecary, you go to see that person. So Bedlam in the Apothecary is sort of like this unraveling of things within himself. So I think the bedlam, the struggle, the interiority is like him struggling with like, I really want to cure everything, and coming up with these really, very simple, like pouring water and salt and clocks for deja vu and things like that. Yeah. So I mean, there's a little bit of humor in there, but it's also, somebody struggling within themselves to find these things. So the bedlam and the apothecary is a bit of a play on words there too. So hopefully that answers it. Yes. He's sort of unraveling himself. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I just wanted to be like the smart reader who was like, and I want to make this observation, John, that it was very important.
No, it is. It is.
A thesis about this, how the human, indignities and problems need addressing, but really disease.
Yeah. And that was the end where it was like that kind of defeat at the end, where it was defeat or a disease, nothing, because it was like I'm realizing that there's nothing that I can do to cure all of these things. So hopefully that's not too defeatist, but just realistic about looking inwards and thinking about how we can start with ourselves. So hopefully that helps. Cool. Thanks for the question, Angela.
In that same story, you at one point there's broken glass, and I kept on thinking that somehow was going to be significant. Maybe it was, and I missed it, but it was the only time that we got out of the flowers and other things. How did the glass get in there, and what do you see it as?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a point where I believe it was for vanity, that he comes up with his remedy or his solution, and then talking about how looking upon oneself and seeing someone else or something else could be mighty impactful, and then realizing that actually, you know what, that's the part that's set up, and then there's another part. Let me actually look into it so I can tell you exactly what I was thinking there, because it was a little bit ago that I wrote this. There we go. It was for the deja vu part. So we had that part that I just referenced earlier, where he's talking about seeing someone else, seeing something else could be mighty impactful. And then we move into the deja vu, and he realizes that that the moment was a ghost of itself or a reflection. He promptly broke all the mirrors in the lab. So there are those moments that I'm glad that you pointed that out, that most of this is kind of happening in like an intense and unraveling and sort of dreamlike interiority, but we do have some moments where we pull out into the scene. And I do think that it is certainly one of my most experimental stories when it comes to the balance of that, because there's much less of actually in scene and seeing what's happening. So when you sort of are seeing the shards of glass on the ground, when you've got the dahlias all around the lab, and sort of snakes at the end, there's a little hint of them. It's kind of all just sort of like the aftermath of all these sort of remedies that may or may not be actually playing out, whether he's seeing them or not. So yeah, there is the moment where he does break all the glass. Yes.
I have one for both of you, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit about how you used repetition in these stories, kind of similarly, but to like really different effects. Like in John's, it made for more of like comic relief, a little bit of like, repeating the same like the vet who thinks I'm a schmuck or whatever, like the same phrases, like more built up a comedy, whereas like in Christine's it built up more like suspense and like built into that like antsiness of it. And I'd love to hear about like where that part came in. Like, did you just like put that immediately into the draft? Is that something that you just trusted off the bat, or is that something that came in later?
Should I go first, or Christine, do you want to tackle it? I have an idea, honestly. I don't want to speak for Christine, but the two stories that you're referencing, like we were genuinely reading the same thing at the same time. So Sabrina Oramark does both. So if you're reading her stories, she's got all these strange things happening, but as Christine very poignantly pointed out earlier, all the crazy stuff that's going on has adding structure to it. Let's at least you have some sense of where the story is going, or some sense of at least comfort in reading it. On my end, I used it for a little bit more for humor, and she does that quite a lot. And then I noticed, at least in Christine's, that I agreed with you that it built tension, because there was like this person obsessing over these certain different things, and they're repeated and repeated and repeated. And Sabrina Ormark also does that. So I think it stems from our points of inspiration. I can at least say for myself, but I would imagine that Christine would say the same. But if you want to speak to it, Christine.
No, yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. I honestly, at first, I thought of a structure as something that, I was looking at when reading Sabrina Ormark's book. But when I started writing it, I also liked the rhythm it gave to the story. And I was just, yes. So I was just basically trying to build that rhythm and making the reader like anxious, like that's what I wanted to do. And so like when I numbered the sections, I was also trying to be like what an anxious person would do and be like number 1, number 2, like going through a list kind of thing. And I don't know, I just felt like I did things with the structure in terms of repetition to kind of not only make sure that the reader knew what they were, but also kind of build that rhythm that made the reader anxious and, kind of created that experience with the main character. But I agree, like everything John said is pretty much the answer too.
Christine, I know that you're in Brazil right now. And so I'm wondering, do you have some plans or some dreams that you're working on? Far be it from some American to be like, hey, come back to America, it's so hot. But, but are you thinking of grad school, like maybe in the US, or I don't know.
Oh my God.
Like that.
I am, okay, so I think about going to grad school, but not right now for the sake of money. I need some time to breathe, and my parents will kick me out if I don't give them some time to breathe. But no, seriously. I think about grad school, and I definitely think about going back to the US, just because I feel like I have a part of my life that is there now. So, I can't just leave that behind and just go like, nope. I love everyone that's there, and I have so many friends and so many, incredible professors that I admire and that I miss. And so I think about going back for sure, but I don't have any plans because every plan I made in 2020 is gone. So I'm avoiding those now, and I'm just dealing with it. But yes.
We can always make plans in the future, and you'll always have resources to draw on. And I don't mean just like me and Angela and other faculty at Laverne, but certainly the other graduates, right? Because now you're going to be one of the alumni along with everybody else, and they're fantastic resources too. That's funny. That reminds me, Al might appreciate this. When I was hired at Laverne, the dean who hired me, Fred Yaffe, he liked to repeat this. I think it was a Yiddish saying, but it was like, if you want to hear God laugh, make a plan. He would say that very frequently. So that just reminds me. That's nice to think of Fred oddly right now on a late Sunday in January. Thank you all. Thank you all so very much. Thanks for sitting with us today. Thanks for listening to these two very, very talented writers and celebrating fiction and the fiction of the creative writing program and also beyond. Christine, John, you guys are fantastic. John, thanks for coming back, as it were. Christine, thanks for coming on up. And obviously I'll see you this week. And congratulations in advance for your graduation next week.